Yeah, go for it. So yeah, yeah. There you go.
Live from St. Mark Baptist Church in Little Rock, Arkansas, this is a special presentation. Meet the Candidates, a Little Rock Mayoral Candidate Forum.
We have 4 candidates here tonight. We'll have the opportunity to hear from each of them, and you could say this is a job interview of sorts. I'm Pamela Smith, the Communications Director for the Little Rock School District.
And I'm Mark DeMoss, founding pastor of the Mosaic Church of Central Arkansas, and so honored to be here with my good friend Pamela Smith to moderate tonight's discussion. It's not a debate, it's a discussion to introduce these 4 candidates to the city. As we said tonight, the 4 candidates for mayor are on the stage to answer questions that were submitted by the people of Little Rock, and on a variety of topics, actually, from infrastructure, economic development, crime, and jobs. And before we continue, we certainly want to thank Pastor Philip Pointer, the good folk at St. Mark Baptist, for their vision in hosting this event, and Ben Parkinson from Fellowship, and the partnership that you two show in the churches here in the city, and the good spirit that's here. Let's give them a hand and thank them for hosting tonight.
Mark, you know, we have a fantastic audience here tonight, and I'm sure we have quite a few folks watching at home. It's going to be a very spirited discussion, but you'll have an opportunity to learn a lot about these candidates, hearing directly from them.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to have such engagement from the community, both online and as well as right here. So without further ado, we want to go from left to right and introduce the candidates: Baker Curris, Frank Scott Jr., Warwick Sabin, and Vincent Tolliver, and allow you men to introduce yourself in 30 seconds, if you would, to the audience viewing tonight. Baker, we'll begin with you, Mr. Curris.
I've been a lawyer, a businessman, and a community volunteer in Little Rock for 38 years. I served on the Little Rock School Board for 12 years. I served as the superintendent of Little Rock School District for 14 months. I've been married for 36 years as of last night. I have 3 children who all live in Little Rock and who all graduated from the Little Rock School District. I'm very, very proud of that. I have a background, I have the experience, I have the knowledge, but I also have the vision and the passion to do this job. My name is Baker Curris, and I earnestly seek your support for this mayoral position.
Good evening. First, I want to say thank you to my Lord Jesus Christ, and thank you to Pastors Pointer, Parkinson, for bringing us together this evening to discuss Little Rock's future. My name is Frank Scott Jr., born, raised, and still reside in Southwest Little Rock. I'm a product of Little Rock Public Schools, a minister, a banker, a former senior advisor to Governor Mike Beebe, a former highway commissioner. The reason why I'm running for mayor of my hometown is because I want to help unify our city, increase jobs, help create a world-class education system, and engage our youth to make certain that it's time for a new era of leadership in Little Rock that we can move forward. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Warwick Sabin, and I'm excited for this opportunity to talk about the future of our city. We are facing some significant challenges, to be sure, from crime and public safety to the quality of our public schools, jobs and economic opportunity, as well as building and maintaining our infrastructure. But all of those challenges can be overcome with bold, inclusive, and visionary leadership. I want to bring new energy and new ideas to City Hall, as well as a track record of achieving real results through 6 years in the state legislature, my track record in the private sector, and my community service. And I look forward to bringing positive change to Little Rock as your next mayor. Thank you.
Good evening, Little Rock. Good evening, St. Mark Baptist Church. You know, voters are experiencing an erosion of trust, and the levels are staggering. Our campaign, known as the People's Campaign, seeks to rebuild that trust. So, on behalf of the People's Campaign, my name is Vincent Tolliver, and it is an honor and privilege to be running for mayor of the great city of Little Rock, and I am working extremely hard to earn your votes.
Thank you. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and we certainly as a city want to thank you for throwing your hats in the ring, so to speak, and we appreciate you being here certainly tonight. I know you all have clapped for them individually. Let's give them all a round of applause and tell them thank you for what they're doing tonight.
Well, now we get down to business, gentlemen. It's time for questions. We want to say thank you to KRK and Fox 16, of course, the viewers who submitted questions. We received many, and unfortunately, our time will not allow us to get to all of them, but we will address as many as we can. The questions have been edited for brevity and clarity. Each candidate will have the opportunity to answer questions from their own perspective and not use this time to discuss another candidate's campaign or position. As we mentioned previously, this is not a debate. This is a forum. In no particular order, each candidate will be given 60 seconds to answer each question with a 10-second grace period. And candidates, we do not want to have to buzz you, so we please ask that you adhere to the time and be respectful of each other as you respond to the questions. Mark and I will be alternating our questions, and we will ensure that the candidates do not exceed their allotted time per question. So we're going to toss it to Mark to ask the first question. Mark.
Thank you, Pamela. And for this first question, we'll just go right down the line, beginning with you, Mr. Curris. The question was submitted, it was this. Little Rock Police reports that violent crime is down 24%, property crime is down 14%, and overall crime in Little Rock is down 16%. But too many residents, it doesn't feel this way. What would you do to continue the downward trends and also to change perceptions?
Well, the first thing we have to do is push on with our full staffing at the police department. We're finally almost up to full staffing, which is 207 officers on the ground patrolling, approximately 550 officers. Got another class that's graduating this Friday. So we have to fully staff, which we have not been fully staffed. That's going to be a real challenge in our budget because we've basically balanced our budget the last several years by not staffing and having these open, unfilled positions. That's the first thing. Then we have to continue this interagency work that we've been doing. It worked back in the 90s, if you recall, when we had serious trouble in our town with violent crime. Interagency cooperation, intergovernmental cooperation, because the crimes don't just start and stop at our city limits. They keep going. And this kind of intergovernmental cooperation has made a huge difference, and we need to continue that very dramatically. Now, the community policing aspects that we need to undertake and really get behind will be possible if we're fully staffed, as we will be. And community policing is essential in our town to build public trust and to keep the public fully informed, and I think that's something that we can do. We'll talk about it a little bit sooner. It's a philosophy, it's not a program, but when officers can get in neighborhoods and have time to meet and greet people, that's what they need to do.
Thank you. Mr. Scott.
What we've learned in our frank discussions in Southwest Little Rock, in the Petaway neighborhood, or even in Pleasant Valley Owners Association, is that crime is a critical issue in our city today. But we also understand that crime answering issues that have results in relates to poverty and education. As a minister, I've to too many funerals in this city as a result of crime. What we have to do is create more opportunities and more jobs and focus more on educational achievement to create crime prevention. However, from a tactical standpoint, We have to increase our workforce as it relates to our Little Rock Police Department so we can have true community policing. I would commit to increasing our police force from 593 to 700 police officers. In addition to that, we have to make certain that those same police officers reflect our community and understand our community. As they reflect our community, understand our community, we need to make certain they understand de-escalation tactics, implicit bias, and true diversity and inclusion training. If we do that, we will have crime prevention efforts in this city, and I look forward to being your mayor one day to execute this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Saban.
Thank you. Everywhere I go in the city, I meet somebody who's been victimized by violent crime, or who feels violated because their home has been burglarized, or their car has been broken into, or someone who's called 911 and the police haven't responded. Or I talk to the police and say they wish they could respond better, but they don't have the resources or the manpower. I talk to business leaders who can't recruit people into Little Rock, or real estate agents who can't sell a home because of our violent crime problem, or people who won't visit or shop in Little Rock because of our violent crime problem. We had 85 vacant police officer positions when I started my exploratory committee about a year ago. We need to make sure our police are fully staffed and fully resourced, but we also need to make sure we get back to community policing, which was a strategy that worked in Little Rock because the police were in the neighborhoods, they had better relations with the community, and could respond more quickly. We also have to make sure that this is not fully the burden of just the police. We can work with code enforcement, with youth services, with community programs to make sure that it's a citywide effort to prevent and enforce the law. And I will make sure as mayor that this is my critical and urgent priority going into office. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Mr. Tolliver.
You know, when I think about crime and safety in Little Rock, I think about the status, the statistics, the data. I live in Ward 1, and what we know from living in Ward 1 is that 35% of the crime in the city actually happens in Ward 1. I am a fan of community policing, but I'm also a fan of leadership from the top. I think we need to look at the leadership of the Little Rock Police Department. I think that we need to deploy police officers in Ward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the ground. I think we need to work with the neighborhood associations to make sure that we are partnering with them. So if you see something, say something. I believe in community policing. It works. It's proven. What we don't have in the city of Little Rock is a culture that believes in community policing. We don't have enough officers out walking the streets. We don't have enough officers walking, riding on bicycles. When I'm mayor of the city of Little Rock, we'll have both. We will have bicycles deployed all over the city. We will have officers working with the neighborhood associations and the people who are in charge of the neighborhood associations, working with them closely and walking all over the city, because what the community needs is police officers that they trust.
Okay.
They do not need police officers that are rotating in and out of communities. So
Thank you,
when
Mr.
I'm mayor,
Tolliver.
I will make sure that
you.
police officers, community, the wards
Pamela,
in which we live.
Thank you so much. Don't mean to cut you off, but we're trying to keep it on time schedule. Thank you for your answer, sir.
And
Pamela.
gentlemen, if you will direct your attention to the lovely timekeeper on the front row, she will help us all stay on track. And also one other quick note, gentlemen, if you would please hold your microphone closer to the top and not the base. That will help eliminate the static. Thank you. So our next question now has to do with racial discrimination. Some people believe that racial discrimination is a factor in the makeup of the city's board of directors, particularly the at-large positions. And with petitions currently circulating, do you believe at-large city director positions should be eliminated? And we're going to start with you, Mr. Saban.
Thank you. Well, this is no judgment on the people who currently occupy those offices, but I definitely am in favor of eliminating the at-large positions for the city board. I believe that the history of our city speaks to the reason why the at-large directors were created in the first place. It goes back to the 1950s, and the idea was really to try to offset communities of color and the representation and the power that they might have in city government. I think there are a lot of issues with our city government right now that could be fixed through systemic change. I think a lot of progress in our city is impeded because we have a very dysfunctional city government, and almost everything about the system is designed and built against itself. I think the at-large directors are one place to start to make sure that we have direct representation, ward by ward, that people know that their representatives are accountable to them where they live, and that they can hold those people responsible at the ballot box in a fair election.
Thank you, Mr. Sabin. We're going to move on to you, Mr. Scott.
Growing up in Little Rock, I've seen different iterations of our city government. What we found is that there are many voices that aren't at the table. But sooner or later, the voices of the voiceless will speak up. And what they've been doing is speaking up that there is some discontent with our current form of government. My philosophy is for greater representation. Right now, we do not have greater representation in our city. And I would be in favor of repurposing our at-large city directors, but a little bit differently. We would change those 3 at-large city directors and make those ward directors. I firmly believe due to the landmass of West Little Rock, there's a need for an additional West Little Rock city director. There's a need for additional Southwest Little Rock city director. And there's also a need for a dedicated Midtown city director. And so what I would like to do is to see the form of government move from at-large city directors to all wards, and it would be moving from 7 ward directors to 10. We have to have greater representation so all voices are heard, because there are all different types of aspects in our city to move forward, and it's time to unify our city and listen to all voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Tolliver.
I absolutely believe that we should not have at-large city directors, and I want to give credit where credit is due. I am very pleased that my city director, Director Irma Hendricks, led the charge, and she got the petition circulating. I was one of the first to sign them. I certainly believe, because for me, it disenfranchises the voters. We have 7 wards in this city, and 7 wards come with 7 city directors. The at-large city directors have a tendency to have an imbalance in the government of the city, and so I would like to see stronger city directors. I would like to see them empowered the way that they should be empowered, and I would not like to see city directors at large, because I don't think it's good for Little Rock.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kurz?
Well, our form of city government was last examined in 2007, so the voters had a choice then. If you look at electing a mayor citywide and understand that that's appropriate and fair, then I don't quite understand why electing 3 people citywide who've done excellent work, including ones in the room right now, the longest tenured city director has been elected and reelected and reelected and reelected citywide. So as easy as it would be to say that that's not working for our city, I think you ought to examine the work that these people have been doing. Now, what I will do, if the city wants to have this discussion, and I think it's a healthy one, if I'm elected mayor, in January or early February, we'll have the same process that we had that gave us the Vision Little Rock and Future Little Rock processes that we had to get us to where we are now. An open community discussion where we involve people and decide what's best for our city, and then pull together. Because the notion that somehow this is a divisive issue is easy to say, but I don't see the evidence of that. I don't see it happening, and I don't see it happening on the board itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. This next question has to do with development and potential displacement, submitted by a viewer. It reads this way: downtown Little Rock has seen a big revival over the last number of years, while other areas of the city, such as the 12th Street corridor or potentially the University District, have not. What would you like to see in these areas of the city, other areas beyond downtown, and how would you ensure that development won't lead to displacement? Mr. Tall, we'll begin with you.
Sure, thank you for the question, Mark. I'd like to see a number of things. First and foremost, I'd like to see developers who get tax credits, subsidies from the city. I'd like to hold them accountable for the things that they would say they do in exchange, say that they will do in exchange for the subsidies and the tax credit. For example, I'd like to see the city directors get behind what is called a subsidy clawback. And what the subsidy clawback does, it is a contract clause that provides a money-back guarantee if developers fail to fulfill the promises that made them get the subsidy in the first place. That holds the developers accountable. It's good for the city. It's good for the people, and it's a policy that makes sense.
Thank you. Mr. Kurz, we'll go to you next.
I've spent a lot of time in the Central City, and when I say that, I mean the area roughly bounded by the railroad tracks west of Central High School all the way south to I-30 and then back west to University. And it's a marvelous area with beautiful real estate, approximately 8,000 vacant lots in our city right now. 22% of the homes in that area are vacant. 13% of the lots. 35% of the lots and homes around Central High School are vacant. So the displacement notion is one we need to consider. And the residents I talk to are good folks, nice people, take care of what they have. But what's getting us in that area and what's really hurting our city in many, many ways is the fact that so many of these vacant properties are deteriorating rapidly. They're not generating any revenue, yet they cause a lot of compliance problems and code problems. And I'm going to post on my website, I think it's up already, a revitalization piece that discusses this in much more detail than one could give you in a minute. But if you go to my website, you'll see it. And that's the secret to Little Rock. It builds a community, it builds a sense of place, and it's a marvelous area, and it has to be revitalized, and you can get all those details on the website.
Thank you, Mr. Kurz. Mr. Sabin.
Thank you. As mayor, my economic development strategy will be focused on small business and entrepreneurship because I think it's the most effective, most sustainable, and most equitable kind of economic development. And if you look at the history of the city of Little Rock, all of the companies that we brag about that we're most proud of, from Alltel, Axiom, Stevens, Dillard's, they weren't brought in from outside. They were born here as small entrepreneurial ventures. And we need to keep that in mind because this is something that I do in my private sector work at Winrock International. I created the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub to give resources to entrepreneurs to start businesses. I passed legislation to support entrepreneurship and small business because I believe that if we have a program to support small business and entrepreneurs in every part of the city, then we can have revitalization without gentrification because we're economically empowering the people who live in those neighborhoods to start those businesses, to hire people in their neighborhoods, to revitalize those buildings, and really make it happen. We've seen this happen in cities like Memphis and Chattanooga and Louisville, great models for us to follow, but it starts by having an equitable economic development strategy that begins and ends with our small business and entrepreneurial community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Scott, final word on development.
Growing up here in Little Rock, I've seen, as I leave my house every morning from Southwest Little Rock, I go to Ranch Drive, and I see how different our city is. It's time for a comprehensive urban plan for our city, that we truly cast a vision for it, set comprehensive strategies, and execute. How do we execute? We have to have a mayor that's going to be the driver of business development in our city in every sector of the area. What does that look like? In West Little Rock is growing, so we have to support that growth, but we also have to make certain that we improve the infrastructure of the South End, the East End, and Southwest Little Rock so it can be the foundation of economic development. If we have comprehensive urban planning, if we improve our infrastructure, we have a mayor that's going to be the driver of business development and not outsource economic development to the Chamber of Commerce. We have to set and start an economic development corporation that is led by the mayor right here, right now, and it's time for this change. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We are moving on to our next question now, and it does have a hint of economic development linked to it. As mayor, how would you attract and retain employers and good-paying jobs that provide opportunities for citizens of all ages and all skill sets? And we will start, I believe, with let's start with Mr. Scott.
To continue on with economic development, we have to have on day one, if I'm blessed to become your mayor, I'm going to bring all of the business owners, all the business entities on one table, help them understand that we have to applaud our friends in Northwest Arkansas and take a page out of their playbook and institute more of our regional networks to locate their jobs here right now so we can go to Dallas, go to Atlanta, and say, hey, you got 50 jobs right there in Dallas and Atlanta, but you have a financial capital epicenter right here, right now. You're 1 or 2 phone calls away from a governor. Bring your jobs here for our quality of life. Secondly, we have to grow our own, and we have to take care of our existing entrepreneurs who are committing to the ministry of our citizens and have to cut the red tape and no longer be an impediment to business growth in our city to make certain that it expands everywhere in our city, no matter where it's located. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We'll turn to you now, Mr. Kurz.
If we want to attract national business into our city, first we have to do is get off these hot lists for violent crime. Simple as that. If you've got a bunch of people looking at Little Rock, they're not coming here if we're fourth, as the FBI says we were in the first half of 2017 in violent crime. We've got to fix that, but we can fix that, and it's being fixed right now. The second thing we have to do is understand that we do hatch a lot of business here. At the FinTech Center, we hatched 4 businesses. We incubated them, and they flew the coop. They left Little Rock, and the reason they did is quality of life. They want a sense of place. They want a nice place to live. They can go anywhere. Most businesses now that are virtually located anywhere. And Little Rock is a wonderful town, but it has to be a wonderful town and a wonderful place to live, and it can be. But that happens in neighborhoods, neighborhood by neighborhood. It becomes a safer place. It becomes a prettier place. It becomes a place where people enjoy living next to their neighbors in good schools. It all happens when retail comes with the rooftops, and that rooftop development is what we're missing right now. We're hollowing out this city from the inside out by neglecting the inner city, and that's what happens. You see growth out west, which is marvelous, but we had more demolitions last year and 2 planning zones than we had new building permits. That has to stop, and code enforcement can help there. It's a very important thing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Curris. Mr. Sabin.
The most valuable commodity in the 21st century economy is talent. It's our human capital. And we need to make sure we know how to develop, retain, and attract talent. And I talked earlier about entrepreneurship and small business, and I still think that's the most critical component of building a sustainable economy here in Little Rock. But let's also talk about how do we make sure that we are preparing our young people and our adults for the jobs of the 21st century? Because there are jobs available even right now that our young people coming out of high school don't have the skills to take. And we're not providing the avenues for them to get access to the education and the skills development to take those jobs. And so I want to see Little Rock really adhere to the private sector with our school district and our technical colleges and make sure that we're creating apprenticeship programs and other opportunities to really join our young people. And by the way, our community that's coming out of prison to be able to get the skills they need to take the jobs that are available, build that human capital pool here in Little Rock, and that will attract more companies, as we've seen happen in other cities around the country.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tolliver.
When I think about attracting businesses to the city, the first thing that comes to mind is the human capital, the talent. So to the table, I would bring businesses, but not only would I bring businesses to the table, I would look at the institutions that we have in the city. Philander Smith College, the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, Arkansas Baptist College. Those schools produce some incredibly talented young people. I would also focus on millennial engagement. Millennials are at the cutting edge of technology. They are intelligent, they are smart, they are savvy. I would bring the millennials to the table, and we would all sort of figure out a way to make this thing work, because when you talk about the quality of life in Little Rock, you really can't beat it. Little Rock is just under 200,000 people. You can get anywhere in the city in less than 20 minutes. The traffic is sometimes heavy, but only in the morning, so you can navigate the city easily. I would make sure that we reach out to everyone in the city and we develop the neighborhoods in a fashion that would reach out and attract people across the business spectrum, across industries. It's all about the talent. It's all about neighborhood revitalization and make sure
Mr.
that
Tolliver,
the neighborhoods
that's
are
our
attractive.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mark?
Yes, final question in this segment, gentlemen. Given the current political climate and painfully polarized divisions of race, class, and culture, how would you lead the city and its citizens to embrace unity, one another, and the common good beyond the distinctions of our society that so often and otherwise divide?
Thank you very much. We're going to take that question in just a few minutes, but we want to thank all of those who've been watching us on KRK4 and Fox 16. This actually is going to conclude our television broadcasted portion of the forum, but we hope you will stay with us as we continue our discussion on Facebook. You can find this live stream by visiting St. Mark's page or KRK's or Fox 16's page. You can join us now. Thank you. All right, now you can take the question.
I want to welcome all of you back to our mayor discussion here with 4 candidates and those of you joining us live on Facebook. We finished that last segment with a question, didn't have time to answer it, so we'll throw it back. And Mr. Sabin, we'll start with you. Let me read that question again. Given the current political climate and painfully polarized divisions of race, class, and culture, how would you lead the city and its citizens to embrace unity, one another, and the common good beyond the distinctions of our society that so often and otherwise divide?
Well, I think a lot of the unity that we're seeking in our city can be realized if we actually treat people fairly and we have equity in all of our policies at the city level. I think all it takes is two eyes to go around the city and see how inequitable certain things are, from the state of our infrastructure from one side of the city to the other, or the quality of our school from one neighborhood to another, or any sort of aspect that you look at in the city. I think there's a sense that certain groups of people are left out, not listened to, and we need to change that, and that will be a tremendous priority for me as mayor, and I want to be held accountable. I want to be transparent in how we measure that progress, whether it's in how I appoint boards and commissions so that they reflect the diversity of the city, to the kind of things I advocate for in terms of how we spend our city dollars and where we spend them, and in terms of how we respond and react to the comments that we get from our citizens. Again, this is about a city government being responsive, accountable, transparent, and measurable. And when we start to find equity, we'll start to find unity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tolliver.
I think that when we think about equity and unity, what I like about the People's Campaign, we are steeped in fairness, equality, and justice. And what that means is everyone in this city deserves a fair shot. Everyone deserves to be treated, no matter if you are north of 630 or south of 630. And I'd like to foster administration that takes stock of the people all across the city and make sure that we are treating people as decent, hardworking human beings like we should. And not only that, I need to make sure that the city equally distributes services and contracts throughout the city, because what we've seen is a lot of times the city operates like a private club. Only a few have access to the services. I think everyone needs to have access to the services that the city has, without regard to race, color, creed. And so as mayor of Little Rock, I would make sure that everyone in the city has the fair access to services provided by the city, and I will make sure that neighborhoods aren't neglected like some neighborhoods are neglected now. Infrastructure that we'll get to later.
Thank you very much. Mr. Curris.
Well, I've actually been involved in large organizations and managed large organizations, and I took over one in May of 2015 that most people thought was a dysfunctional, very divided, and very mistrustful organization. And I was there. And the way you change organizations is not by a lot of cheap talk. It's not by a lot of platitudes. It's by putting your boots on the ground, leading from the front, valuing every single human being that you meet. You go to where issues arise, and you treat people with fairness and kindness and equity everywhere you go. And it starts at the top. It doesn't filter up from the bottom. It's easy to divide. It's very difficult to break down walls. It's hard to build bridges, but you can do it. But you need a leader who's experienced in doing that. It's not the simple thing. It's not the easy thing, but it's the doable thing, because people in communities will come together. They don't have to watch the national news. They don't have to argue about whether the president's any good. They want to talk about their neighborhood. They want to talk about crime. They want to talk about jobs. And when you talk to people about those things and you treat every person with fairness and kindness and respect, it builds, and it can happen. And I have been there, and I have done it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scott.
Our city's at a crossroads. We've been disconnected for quite some time, and we have to have intentionality when we talk about unity. When you have unity through community, how do you do that? You do it by making certain through arts, through entertainment, through sports, or even through food, where we have to create communities together where we talk to one another, that we visit with one another, that we dine with one another, that we understand each perspective and what we may be dealing with in our own individual homes when we go to our own individual issues. That's how you create unity in this city, and it's time to have a leader who understands this city, understands the diversity of the city, understands this city is disconnected. When I go to Southwest Little Rock, but I didn't even know what Kavanaugh was until I was 21 years old, because I lived in isolation. And guess what? My same friends who lived in Hillcrest never went past Park Plaza Mall either. We have to change it by being intentional through arts, through sports, through entertainment, and that's how we would do it, and do it quick, fast, and in a hurry. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Panel.
We have a very important question related to education. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Sabin. What do you think is the role of city government in ensuring access to quality public education, and how would you build on this if you are elected?
Thank you for asking that question. It's a tremendously important question. I think too often the quality of public education that's available to our citizens is based on where they live in the city. And that's not right, because it cuts off opportunity for our young people. But it's also created a situation where people are moving out of the city or not moving to the city because they don't have faith in our public education. And as mayor, I want to be part of the solution. I think it's critically important to have a political role in this. In 6 years in the state legislature, I've been a strong proponent of public education. I served 2 years on the House Education Committee. I spoke out against the state takeover of the Little Rock School District when it happened, and I've been advocating for a return to local control for this entire time. And as mayor, I want to make sure that I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with our superintendent and an elected school board so that we're creating a plan to accomplish one simple goal, which is no matter where you live in the city of Little Rock, you know you can send your kid to a great public school. And it needs to be a citywide effort and a big plan that includes our political leadership engaged with the school district, because nothing is more important than the future of our young people and equity of opportunity for all.
Thank you, Mr. Sabin. We're going to check in with Mr. Curris now.
Thank you. When I took over as superintendent of the schools, we had a commitment from the school board that was elected to build 2 new schools. And I signed the architectural agreements for those 2 schools on exactly the same day, and we're building both of them. You have to have quality facilities so students, no matter where they live, have a beautiful building in which to receive their education. The other thing you have to understand about schools is schools are not leading indicators. Everybody blames the schools. They say the town's going down the drain because the schools are no good. Well, think about this. It's very true in that schools are trailing indicators in neighborhood health. If you have a healthy neighborhood with people who care about one another, I don't care what their income level, they will perform. Go to Wakefield and see how those kids are doing down there, because they care about one another, they work hard, and they stick together. So think about neighborhood development first. How do we have healthy neighborhoods where people don't move all the time? Their kids aren't always coming and going and moving. High mobility destroys student achievement. And then you have to empower educators, value educators, and deal with them in a way that doesn't make them feel as if they're the problem, because they're not. They're the heart and soul of this town, and people cannot scream at them anymore. You have to help them, and I'd be the best friend the school district ever had.
Thank you, Mr. Curris. Mr. Scott.
Being the only candidate that's a product of Little Rock Public Schools, I think I have a unique perspective. I've been able to see this school district, the good, the bad, and even the ugly. And it's time for city leadership to no longer be silent about our school district. It's time to make certain that we get our school district back today. But what does it look like when we get it back? I've learned in business that the best way to influence something that you don't have a control over is to be a strategic investor. And so as your next mayor, I'm going to make certain that the city of Little Rock will have a summer academy focused on grade level reading from kindergarten to 5th grade, 6th grade to 9th grade. It will be focused on grade level reading in STEM, and 9th grade to 12th grade will be focused on career exposure. And that way we will change the dynamic, because if a kid is not able to read by grade 3 or 5, they're on their way to being dead or in jail, or on their way to being dead or in jail. And we have to stop it right now by no longer being silent about our school district. And that's what I plan to do as your next mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Tolliver.
Being the only candidate that has been in the forefront of the return of local control for the Little Rock School District, marching and protesting in front of the Little Rock School District administration building, marching and protesting in front of the Arkansas Department of Education at the meetings, we have got to have a mayor that will be very vocal for the Little Rock School District and will demand that the Little Rock School District return local control, because a city and a community is as strong as the school district is. And so I am a public school advocate. I think that we need to invest money in the public schools. I think that the city of Little Rock should invest in pre-K for all. It's a long-term investment, but it makes sense. If you have a mayor that's interested in investing in pre-K for all. It builds a stronger city. It prepares kids for talent in the future, and it makes for an opportunity to provide young kids with an opportunity to grow and foster as long as they move their way through school. So I am for a city who is very invested in the Little Rock School District and public education.
Thank you. Our next question we've touched on briefly in business. I know it's important to millennials. In terms of population, Little Rock has remained somewhat stagnant in the past decade. Whether that's attributed to a lack of professional opportunities, crime, or other factors, what do you say to encourage young adults, millennials especially, recent college graduates, or others, frankly, to both work and settle in Little Rock, as well as what do you say to big business and employers to bring jobs here? We'll begin with Mr. Scott.
Being the only candidate that's actually a millennial, I've got a lot to bring to the table. As it relates to jobs, in 2006, Little Rock had 96,703 jobs. In 2018, we have 96,003 jobs. We've been stagnant. We need a mayor that's going to be a chief growth officer that's going to be intentional about bringing jobs to this city. But we also have to make certain that we focus on technology, we focus on innovation, we focus on minority and business owners, because that is the new wave of new businesses across the nation, and tapping into that value and to that potential. I'm tired of my classmates having to leave Little Rock to find a good job. And we have to have a mayor that's going to focus on because everybody wants to come back home sooner or later, but they have to have something to come back home to. And if I'm going to be your next mayor, jobs is going to be my #1 priority.
Thank you. Mr. Kuras.
Well, jobs are a priority. I've actually got 3 kids who came back, so you can't blame me for the people not coming back here. All 3 of mine are in town, and they love it here. And they love it here because it's a wonderful place to live. You can slam it all you want to and say it's an ugly town and it's got all these problems. That's all true. But if you want to make a difference, come to Little Rock, Arkansas. Dig in, pitch in, and help out, and you'll meet the nicest people in the whole wide world. Now, if you want to get millennials in town, we're doing a good job with some of that. The FinTech venture is great. Some of that, I'm just fascinated. But we have to get wonderful people to start jobs here, keep companies here. That involves walking neighborhoods. We need affordable housing in the central city where you can get around on a bicycle or by walking, where you can go and meet your neighbors and walk to a place to eat. That's the thing that turns me on. I may not be a millennial, but I love the outdoors. I love neighborhoods. I love big trees. We've got all of that stuff, and it's right here. It's low fruit, easy to pick. All we have to do is redevelop our central city, and we'll have all sorts of places where millennials will love to be. And they can work anywhere. They can get on a computer just like I do and work from any place. So we've got to be sure that the mayor understands what a wonderful town this can be.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Tolliver.
You know, when I think about Little Rock and I think about the city, I think that we have to be in a position to engage millennials at the levels in which they are interested. They're interested in technology. They're interested in a quality of life. They're interested in 3 weeks vacation. They're interested in a freedom of choice in terms of the ability to work from home. So we have to be able to focus the areas of employment based around what these millennials want. So we'll have something attractive to offer them. Because if we don't have something attractive to offer them, there's a lot of them that won't come here, of course, and because the environment is millennial friendly, so there are other opportunities out there for them. So we have to be about the business of making sure that we have something attractive to offer millennials, something that they will stay, and we will have to make sure that they are engaged in this community, not just work, but providing a work-life balance. So that's one of the things that we could do for the city of Little Rock.
Thank you very much. Mr. Saban.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let's maybe begin by having younger leadership for the city of Little Rock. I think that would send a very good signal to people outside of Arkansas that Little Rock is a place that values its young people. And I talked earlier about attracting and developing and retaining talent and all of the things that we talked about earlier in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of having apprenticeship and job skills for our young people will keep them here. But so much is drawn by the quality of life in our city, and we do have a great quality of life. but it can be so much better. When you see Northwest Arkansas, for instance, investing in a trail system that's extensive when they don't even have a true urban area, and we haven't done the same thing yet here in Little Rock, when a true trail system is not only a recreational tool, not only good for public health, but actually will help our people move around when they are disadvantaged and don't have access to a vehicle, help them go to their job or go to school. These are very important things, and they're amenities that attract young people in cities all over the country. We shouldn't be widening an interstate right in the middle of our downtown if we're serious about creating an environment that will attract young people to the city of Little Rock. They want to live somewhere where they don't have to own a car and they can enjoy a walkable, bikeable downtown. Thank you.
Well, speaking of interstates, while the mayor has limited control over the project, the widening of Interstate 30 has really been a very controversial issue. How would you advocate to ensure that future plans do not further divide certain areas of the city, and would you seek funds from the Arkansas Department of Transportation to invest in local transportation and infrastructure projects? And we are going to start with Mr. Tolliver.
Thank you, Pam. That's an excellent question. Absolutely, I would seek funds to develop the infrastructure because, number one, I'm against the widening of I-30. I think it doesn't make sense in the current plan. I think that they haven't brought enough neighbors in Petaway and the other areas that border I-30 to the table, so it hasn't been thoughtful. I think that if we develop in a more thoughtful way, it makes a whole lot of sense. I would certainly ask the state for money as it relates to transportation because I don't think that Little Rock has a thriving transportation system. More people should be using public transportation. That would cause us not to have so many traffic delays, and I think we need to expand the transportation that we have from Rock Creek. I think we also need to look at getting transportation, a train that comes from the airport to downtown. So there are a lot of infrastructure as it relates to transportation that can happen. We just have to be creative about it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tolliver. Now we're going to bounce back to you, Mr. Sabin.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is a passionate issue for me because I was the first public official to take a position against the 30 Crossing project, mainly because I didn't see the need to widen an interstate right in the middle of our downtown. I understand the need to improve our infrastructure in terms of safety, in terms of the exits, but adding 6 or 8 lanes to a downtown interstate right in between two of the most revitalizing parts of our community to further divide, to further create traffic problems, to spend $700 million to ruin what could be our biggest asset in terms of attracting and retaining people to live in our city. I just think we can do better and we can be smarter and we can make different kinds of investments. And directly to your question, as mayor, I will use my seat on Metroplan to advocate for more progressive and innovative ways to deal with our transportation infrastructure. I think that the mayor has a significant role to play in setting a vision for our city, what we can be, and having the courage to stand up for our city when we are basically being used as a vehicle for people to come to and through, but not standing up for the residents and the people who've actually invested and live here in our city.
Thank you, Mr. Sabin. Mr. Scott.
As the only mayoral candidate that's a son of Little Rock and a son of south of 630, I know the history of 630. Also, as the only candidate that was an actual highway commissioner that was directly involved in the 30 Crossing project, it took pains for me to make certain that the history of the past was not repeated with 630, with 30 Crossing. And once I received the assurances that that would not happen, I began to support this project. I take issue when individuals mislead the public. No one's losing a home. 30 Crossing is not going to divide anything. It's actually going to connect. It's about safety. We have to fix the bridge. It has 125,000 people who travel that corridor every day. It's a regional project. Secondly, it's about jobs. Do you think people are moving to the East End, calling it East Village now, if they're afraid of the 30 Crossing project? It's about quality of life because we listened to the community and changed the project more than 20 times to make certain there will be a world-class park. It's about safety, it's about jobs, it's about quality of life, and it's about understanding the history of Little Rock. I take issue when people mislead the public.
Thank you. Mr. Curris?
Thank you. Let's do a little reality check here. First, the project has been approved. Short of a lawsuit, it's going through. the next mayor ought to be thinking about how to be effective in the future, not what sounds good today or what gets a vote here and there, but the main thing is the next mayor is going to have to protect the interests of this city and the homeowners who live in the area of this new project, which is going to solve a lot of major problems. The actual area is going to be much different after this project is built, with a large area of open space, with those very, very dangerous and unacceptable ramps gone, with that gross pigeon roost, which is 2nd Street over, is going to be fixed to where pigeons can't get down there. It's very even unhealthy. So the project is coming. Short of a lawsuit, it's going to happen. And what the mayor needs to do is protect the interests of the city in the streets that abut the project, the neighbors who have to live with the construction, and then there's going to be a lot of decisions. It's a design-build project, and the mayor has to be a good negotiator to be certain that we get a project that doesn't have adverse impacts beyond what we've already projected. I think it's a good project. It makes sense. It's safe. And,
Thank you, Mr.
and
Curris.
to hold out for nothing is a big mistake.
Thank you very much.
We received quite a few questions on fair and affordable housing. Here's one. What would you do to increase access to safe and affordable housing options for adults of varying income levels? We'll begin with you, Mr. Scott.
As a banker, and understanding the huge housing stock that we have in the South End and the East End of debilitated homes and uninhabitable homes, we have to make certain that we utilize and revitalize and rebuild our cities. How do we do that? There's some great opportunities now with opportunity zones. There's great opportunities in working with the banking community through the Community Reinvestment Act to make certain that we can start leveraging our anchoring institutions at the University of Arkansas, like Little Rock, the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences, and Pulaski Technical College, to bring more people into these homes, to create mixed income use communities, to make certain that they're affordable, and make certain that we also create a community where areas were once vibrant communities in this city. If we do that, we will also create a crime prevention policy by doing that, because now we'll bring more people back home in those areas and they won't be crime centers. So it's not only a crime prevention mechanism, but it's also an economic development strategy and an affordable housing strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Curris.
Well, the main thing is a sense of place. Think about this. Why do people want to be downtown now? It has an identity. It has a certain feel about it. It's got a retail environment that's sprung up after those residents arrived there. That's the same thing we need downtown. I've actually done this, where you enter a situation where you want to build a certain sense of place. And we can do that. It's going on in Soma. It has to happen in the Central I neighborhoods and the areas all the way west to UALR. And it can be done, but it has to be done very carefully so that you don't drive out residents who are already there. You don't want that, but you can do it, and you have to do it very carefully with code enforcement to start with, a consistent approach to code violations. You have to get lands out of the hands of speculators who are allowing them just to go to rot and ruin. You have to focus your infrastructure efforts in areas where you can build and drive a sense of place and a community feel throughout that neighborhood. It's happening. There's a project right now on Pine and Cedar that's going to be a step in that right direction, because that's where all the jobs are down that corridor, government, hospitals, and it's possible, but it has to occur a step at a time with hard work through code enforcement to start with, and then through encouraging development through revitalization.
Thank you. Mr. Tolliver.
I think when you talk about affordable housing, one of the first things you have to do is you have to hold the developers accountable to what they say when they come to the city asking for subsidies, which means if a developer comes to the city of Little Rock requesting a tax credit or a subsidy, you need to make sure that that developer is going to have a percentage of housing for people who are at moderate or low income. That means setting aside 30% of their housing so that all the rents won't be, for example, $1,000 like what's going up at Daisy Bates in Maine. Now there is a development that's going up and the rents will be $1,000 plus. So what we need to do is make sure as a city we are writing contracts that hold developers accountable to making sure as they gentrify a particular ward that they have affordable housing for the community instead of having people pushed out who can't afford it. And the way you do that is you have a subsidy clawback that demands that if you don't do what you say, developer, you will have to pay. And so that money is necessary to have that in the clause with the developers so that everyone would be have an opportunity for affordable housing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tolliver. Mr. Saban.
Thank you. One reason why we struggle with affordable housing here in Little Rock and across the state is because Arkansas is unique in being the only state in the nation that, number one, has a criminal eviction statute, and number two, does not require an implied warranty of habitability, which simply means that if you sign a lease to rent a property, you are assured that the place is habitable, that it has running water, that it has heat and air, and that you can live in it safely. As a legislator, in all 3 terms in the House of Representatives, I sponsored legislation to eliminate criminal eviction and to try to get an implied warranty of habitability. And I'm going to continue to be an advocate for tenants here in Little Rock. We have some decent ordinances here. They need to be enforced better. We need to also make sure code enforcement is holding landlords accountable as well, to make sure that affordable housing is good housing for the people who rent it. We need to use our urban land bank to make sure that properties that are abandoned or not being kept up can be revitalized in communities and turned into affordable housing. And we do need to work with developers to make sure that parts of new developments are set aside to be affordable, because it's so important for the future of our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We're almost out of time, just to let you know, and so we'll have time for one more question here. The divisive issue of residency requirements for Little Rock police officers, and that's what will concern. As mayor, how would you address the residency issue concerning police and police hiring? We will begin this time with you, Mr. Kurz.
All right, I've talked to a lot of police officers. I think it's a bad idea to require someone who's a police officer to live anywhere, for one thing. I don't think we ought to do that to EMTs. I don't think we ought to do that to police officers. We don't do it now. And if you talk to police officers, as I have, and I'm not going to tell you which ones, they'll tell you that it's going to hurt our ability to find good police officers, which has been a real serious issue. We're still slightly understaffed, although we're only down 18 officers right now. It makes no sense to me to force people to live somewhere, but it makes every bit of sense to me to have a community where people want to live. You can't build a wall around this town to keep people in or to keep them out. And what we have to do is have a city where people want to live. And I wish every police officer lived here. I wish every teacher did. I wish every nurse did, every doctor, every EMT. But that's not how to do it. That's just not going to work, because you're going to drive down the number of applicants that want to live here. We have incentives already. If you want to come here and you're a police recruit, you can get $5,000 to buy a house. You can get $2,500 to rent a place. And we only allow them to drive their cars out of town 25 miles. I wish they all lived here, but I think it's a bad idea.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Scott.
What we've learned in our frank discussions is that this is a very serious issue, and we have to make certain that we're being very targeted with it. As your next mayor, I would not require police officers to live in this city. However, I would make certain that they would want to choose this city by making certain that they have a school district that's the best that it can be, by making certain that the city leadership gets involved in the school district. I will make certain that we have great parks and trails, that we redevelop what we see at Memorial Park. I'll make certain that they have arts and entertainment. They have jobs here, and they would make that decision to live here. And if they live here, and if they decide to do that, that's a great thing. But we cannot make that requirement, because it would be a horrible issue as it relates to our safety in our city right now. But we have to make certain the next mayor helps them to choose Little Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. Saban.
Thank you. It would be much better for the city of Little Rock if all of our public safety officials lived in the city. It would be much better if overnight the police vehicles were parked in driveways in Little Rock neighborhoods. I want to see that happen, but like the 2 other candidates, I don't think it's a good idea to require it. I think it sends a very bad message when you have to force somebody to live in a place, when the reason why we hear so many people aren't living in Little Rock is because of the quality of our public schools, or ironically, the criminal activity that we have in our city, or the job opportunities that exist for spouses. We need to do better on all of those fronts. We need to make Little Rock a place of choice, a place where everybody wants to live, not only because it's the most convenient place, but because the quality of life is so great, the schools are so good, the jobs are so plentiful, the infrastructure is so terrific that everybody wants to live here. And that's my vision for the whole city, not just for our public safety officials, but I think if we're doing a good job on those fronts, this is a problem that we'll be able to overcome in time. What I don't want to see is the ranks of our public safety officials decimated by a policy when we're struggling to recruit so many officers already.
Thank you, Mr. Saban. Final word on this issue, Mr. Tolliver.
You know, I'm very interested in this business about recruiting police officers, and we're having so much trouble doing so. I think that one of the things to do is have the have better people recruiting them. For example, there's a police officer named Sergeant Willie Davis. Sergeant Willie Davis has excellent relationships with young people across the city. I think they need to invite him at the recruiting table. When you have people who are disengaged in the recruiting process and who don't really know the city, well, yeah, you might have a problem recruiting officers. I do believe that city police officers should live in the communities in what they serve. It makes for stronger communities, it makes for stronger cities, and it makes for safer cities. I don't think that our majority of our police officers should live outside of the city. Do I think we need to force them? No, but I think that we need to strongly urge them to live in the city where they work, where they play, where they can have a quality of life, because it makes neighborhoods stronger, it makes kids feel safer, and we should really promote police officers living in the city where they work, so they don't come into the city with an us against them attitude like we see so much. We need to have police officers live in our own community, and I think that's best for the city of Little Rock.
Thank you very much, candidates. Give them a nice round of applause. We trust that our audience via Facebook and those of you who have joined us here live tonight have gleaned some useful information that will serve you well at the ballot box. Well, this is going to actually conclude the question portion of the forum, but candidates, you have 1 minute to give a final comment, and please help us adhere to the 1 minute mark. Thank you. We're going to start now with Mr. Tolliver.
When you lead with people, the city wins. When your campaign leads with people, the city wins. If you elect Vincent Tolliver in November, the city and the people will win, because I will fight for fairness, I will fight for equality, and I will fight for justice, no matter where you live, no matter what kind of car you drive or don't drive, no matter what kind of house you live in or don't have, no matter how much money you have in the bank or don't have. I will fight for the people in Little Rock from Ward 1 to Ward 7 and make sure that everyone is treated fairly and with dignity and respect, no matter where they live and no matter what type of job they have. So, Vincent Tolliver for mayor of Little Rock on November 6th, thank you for coming out. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Mr. Curris.
I got my first job when I was 14, cleaning fish. And I met people from all walks of life, and I've always valued people. I've been successful in everything I've done. It's a sorry dog that won't wag his own tail, but I got to tell you, this is not a job that you want to have if you don't have experience. It's a $268 million budget. I've managed budgets that big. I've managed organizations that are dysfunctional and need help, and I've had an impact on those organizations. And this is an organization that's got good people in it. This is not a situation where we've got people that don't want to work or don't want to do the right thing. I think we've got a city that can really grow, but it needs vision. It needs to grow from the inside out, not from the outside, and just keep expanding. It needs to be a city where we value every single person. And if there's ever any question about that, ask the people I worked with at the Little Rock School District. It's that simple. We're not going to tolerate anything that's been discussed or even implied tonight about mistreating people or treating people unfairly. That's not who I am and not what I'll do. And that's not what anybody ought to ever do. So I understand that.
Thank you, Mr. Curris.
I didn't see the sign.
Mr. Scott.
The reason why I'm running for mayor of my hometown, because I want to help unify this city. I want to focus on jobs growth. I thank everyone who brought out tonight, because you guys are serious about this city, just as I am. And so I think back over my life, all I can do is just say, thank you, God. Born, raised, still reside in Southwest Little Rock. I'm not supposed to be here. But God has blessed me. And Esther 4:14 says, where Mordecai talks to Esther, it says, for such a time as this. It's time for opportunity in Little Rock. It's time for unity in Little Rock. It's time for new age jobs in Little Rock. It's time that we actually become more intentional in Little Rock. It's time that we have diversity in the marketplace. It's time that we have educational achievement. It's time that we walk together, that we love one another. It is time that we unify the city, focus on jobs growth. And I ask that each of you strongly consider to vote for me. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Mr. Sabin.
Thank you very much. As many of you may know, I started my exploratory committee for this position over a year ago. And if you follow me on social media, you know that I've been all over the city and neighborhood associations and community events and meeting with people just about everywhere. And one thing that I've learned is that I hear the same things everywhere I go. It doesn't matter who I'm talking to, what neighborhood I'm in, what demographic they represent, what political affiliation they may have. I think everybody sees not just the challenges that we're facing, but the opportunities that we have in Little Rock, and most importantly, our potential. And I think what we share is a frustration, basically because our political system and our city government has not unleashed the talent of our people. They haven't given the opportunity for people to participate and really make the most of themselves. And as mayor, that is exactly what I want to do. I want to be a vehicle for the people to realize their best potential. Thank you.
Wow, now that these gentlemen are out of the hot seat, we again hope that you have gleaned some important information, because this is a very timely and important topic to be able to hear from our mayors, or the candidates for mayor for the city of Little Rock. 4 of them, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, it was a great format, great discussion. We want to thank each and every one of you. Thank you. Let's give them one more round of applause as we welcome back here Pastor Pointer, Pastor Parkinson, for a closing word. Thank you, gentlemen. I know I'm, for one, very excited about the candidates and people being here.
We're optimistic about what the future holds, and we know that we will have a new mayor, and we will be praying for our new mayor.
Great working with you, Pamela. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, let me say thank you all tonight for coming and hearing and meeting our candidates. And we are grateful that our city is represented. I believe, as I look out over this audience, and the diversity of our audience is representative of the diversity of our city. And we pray as we go forward as a city that diversity continues to be reflected. Thank you to these candidates for giving us their time tonight. To our moderators, Pam Smith, Pastor Mark DeMoss, thank you all for your time tonight. And certainly all of us are praying for a strong, healthy, and prosperous Little Rock. Again, Ben Parkinson, thank you so much for partnering with me tonight to host this. And if you would lead us in prayer as we dismiss.
I'd be honored. Heavenly Father, we come before you, and we do thank you so much, God, for the leaders that you've given us in our city. Romans 13 reminds us they are ministers of justice for our good. Whether they believe in you or not, they're given the authority to help us maintain order and civility as we live here on the earth, God. So we thank you for them. We praise you for them. And Lord, we beg you, as we think about who might represent us as the mayor of our city here on this stage, God, that you choose them. That's our desire. That's our heart, that you move through the people of this city, Lord, by your sovereign hand to put the man in place who is here to really lead us into the future in healthy ways. Lord, for us to begin to see glimpses of the kingdom of heaven here, of people living together in harmony, loving one another well, the shalom of the city that we see in the scriptures. We long for that for Little Rock, Arkansas, Lord. So we beg you for that. We don't know who that is, quite honestly, but you do, and so we beg you for that. We humbly place ourselves at your feet, and God, I beg you that everyone who has the ability to vote, the right to vote under our great country, would exercise that right. God, Jeremiah reminds us, seek the welfare of the city, for in its welfare you will find your own welfare. God, it is for our good that we participate and that we do these things. So we beg you, move in our hearts to do that. In your name, and amen.